On the German border, a forest of dark secrets. American GIs called it the Death Factory. World War II was fought on vast landscapes across the planet.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
But the evidence of that war is disappearing fast.
That is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in the water.
That's it.
Congratulations.
Now, technology expert Pete Kelsey
I've got to scan this.
and military historian Marty Morgan
Oh my God, look at this view.
are using 21st century technology to strip away the present and reveal the buried secrets of World War II. This time, why was the Hurtgen Forest a death trap for the US Army? How did the winter impede the US advance?
So he's now losing heat really fast.
How did the Nazis turn the forest itself into a weapon?
Whoa.
The Hurtgen Forest. Dense, dark, and today, eerily quiet. For 50 square miles, there's nothing but trees. US military commanders expected to get through these woods on their way to Berlin in a couple of weeks. Instead, through the fall and winter of 1944, it took 6 months and cost tens of thousands of American lives. The Battle of Hurtgen Forest is carved into history as America's bloodiest battle. Why? What happened here? What led the US Army into this mire? The story begins in the summer of 1944. June 6th, British, Canadian, and US troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. By early September, they'd liberated Paris, most of northern France, and Belgium. Allied troops were racing to take Germany.
And that will all come to a grinding halt here at the German border. Allied forces are going to be confronting German soldiers fighting for German soil. And from this point forward, things were only going to get worse.
Military historian Marty Morgan and tech wizard Pete Kelsey have come to the Hurtgen Forest. They're looking for traces of an epic World War II battle. They've set up their HQ in a farmhouse near the edge of the forest. Pete wants to build a 3D virtual terrain map. He'll combine German government LiDAR scans with more sophisticated aerial tech to lift away the trees and ground cover. He hopes to reveal the scars of battle beneath.
Let's bring it up and look at that.
That is amazing, isn't it?
Pete and Marty are joined by Professor Christoph Rass, a German military historian. He's studied the Battle of Hurtgen over many years.
You have the Americans advancing from the west, and then as they get to the border of Germany, they have the Eifel Mountains in front of them.
The Eifel Mountains blocked the way, funneling them into a narrow valley known as the Stolberg Corridor. This is the direct route into Germany. But to the south of the corridor lies the massive Hurtgen Forest. American commanders realized the Germans could hole up in the forest, then attack the American flank. So on September 12, 1944, General Koda sent in an advance party. 6,000 men of the 28th Infantry Division marched on the forest. Their mission? To clear the Germans out.
So in a sense, the Americans are unknowingly walking into a heavily defended area that looks like that?
Yes, and it's an impossible choice. You have to secure it. You can't go around it. And then as you go in it, for a while you lose all the advantages you have.
And this, I mean, to me, it's pretty clear this terrain is going to make moving any heavy equipment all but impossible.
LiDAR shows a man-made barrier 10 miles long. This confronted the advance party before they even reached the woods.
Holy cow.
Could this explain the loss of thousands of American soldiers? Pete and Marty go to check it out.
It's an incredible sight to see, isn't it? Still here, after almost 8 decades.
Unbelievable. It seems to go on for miles in both directions.
These square-based pyramids of concrete are called Dragon's Teeth. They were positioned to stop tanks and trucks in their tracks.
You'd come up on this, and it's a bit intimidating.
Right. This belt should be going for miles to the north and miles to the south.
These teeth were fiendishly simple, but precision-made. How effective was this line of defense? Pete puts his tech to work to find out.
We really want to create a 3D model of the Dragon's Teeth. So with me, I have a tablet equipped with essentially a 3D handheld scanner. And as I move around using this device, in real time, it's going to be capturing data in 3D as I go.
Pete's scanner bounces infrared light off the teeth to capture every detail. From there, he can build a precise 3D virtual model and demonstrate how they might have worked. Advancing tanks would quickly become stranded and vulnerable to enemy fire.
What this wall does is it reduces a modern mechanized army to a rabble of lightly armed infantrymen.
But Pete and Marty notice something strange. These teeth don't appear to have bitten hard steel. There are none of the scrapes and grazes that heavy armor would leave on their surfaces.
If engineers came here and wanted to blow a path through this band of obstacles, that would be an enormous task that would take an enormous quantity of explosives, and it would take a lot of time.
Sure.
U.S. Army engineers improvised. They buried the teeth with earth and easily passed over them. This line of defense was monumentally ineffective. Nevertheless, by September 18th, just 5 days into the battle, the 28th Division had sustained 1,500 casualties and 6 days later withdrew to Belgium. Now the 9th Infantry Division took up the fight. What kind of defenses would they encounter? The Dragon's Teeth were only the first line of defense on Germany's western border. Marty Morgan knows that they were part of a much more complex defense system in the Hurtgen Forest. The Germans called it the West Wall. The Americans knew it as the Siegfried Line. The U.S. 9th Division entered the forest on September 29, 1944. They suffered 4,500 casualties in their first 3 weeks and advanced less than 2 miles. They couldn't even see the German defenses. Pete and Marty can't see those positions either. But maybe a high-fidelity scan will fix that.
Hiram.
Hi, Pete.
Oh, am I glad to see you. Look at this. Very, very impressive. Very large drone. Basically what this drone can do is get this very accurate laser-based unit into the air. This rather amazing piece of technology, in a sense, is going to make the invisible visible.
Backup running. Yeah.
Wow.
This flying scanner is capturing finely detailed data to augment Pete's 3D terrain map. Lasers penetrate the tree canopy to record what lies beneath. Then, using advanced processing software, Pete can strip away the trees to uncover Hurtgen as never before. Back at HQ, the results are impressive.
We've so far never seen LiDAR with such a resolution. And look at the details you can see.
Could those potentially be bunkers?
Only 3 miles from the Dragon's Teeth, they've spotted something. It looks like an elaborate system of German bunkers.
I've got the drone LiDAR loaded up, and look at this.
Armed with new scanning data, they're looking for these hidden defenses.
Hey, Marty,
You got something?
look at that.
Oh, yeah.
And right
Now
where,
we're talking.
Right where it should be. Wow, talk about high ground.
Yeah.
According to the LiDAR, this is the highest point in the area.
It's got a commanding view down onto the road.
At the end of October, the 28th Infantry returned to the forest. Advancing through these trees is deadly.
Well, look at that gun port looking right at us. Wow. Oh, yeah. Yeah. This thing's intact.
Wow, standing water. That's a bit of a surprise considering how cold it is out here.
Is it me, or does that pattern on that wall right there look like somebody threw a grenade in here and the fragmentation just went everywhere?
You know, it does look a little bit like there are some impacts on the side of that wall.
It must have been daunting to advance on a gun emplacement like this. And the scan reveals that it's one of 9 in just this short stretch of the forest. The LiDAR clearly shows that the bunkers command strategic high ground. They have interlocking fields of fire. Pete spots something odd. These bunkers don't seem heavily damaged, while others nearby are completely shattered.
Clearly, there's a lot of damage to this place. But what happened here? Was this part of some great battle? Was this an airstrike?
Pete's gathering data for a 3D model of the German bunkers. He'll capture every bullet strike, crack, and fracture to learn how some were destroyed. Back at HQ, he and Marty are trying to work out why some bunkers remain intact, while others are blown to smithereens.
I've been looking at some of the scan data from these demolished bunkers. On this first one, this roof slab, which is at least 3 feet thick, maybe 4, has been split in 2 places. The walls on either side, specifically over here on the right, you can actually see that it's bowed out.
It's popped out.
Exactly.
At that angle.
On close examination, Pete concludes that these smashed bunkers weren't attacked from the outside.
This is almost certainly an explosive charge from inside. There's no signs of an assault or pitched battle or anything on this bunker, so almost certainly post-war demolition.
So, just as US forces overcame the Dragon's Teeth, they also got past most of the bunkers on the Siegfried Line.
If these bunkers weren't destroyed in battle, how in the world did the Americans get past them?
The Siegfried Line was presented as this impenetrable wall. And what we now know is that it was not as much of a tough nut to crack as had been expected.
Marty thinks that American troops likely spotted the bunkers and somehow got a small force around behind them to attack.
This destruction was oriented toward the west, and instead our forces slip in on it from its blind side.
At some cost, the second line of German defense is breached. But as the American army advanced deeper into the Hurtgen Forest, they come up against an obstacle more fearsome than any man-made fortification: the forest itself. October 1944. US troops have breached the Dragon's Teeth, and they've overcome a daunting system of concrete bunkers in Germany's Siegfried Line. But Pete Kelsey and Marty Morgan are looking deeper into the forest for evidence of full-on battle. Something on the LiDAR has caught Pete's attention.
I thought you should have a look at this. What do you think?
Definitely not German, no trenches. They look oblong, they don't look like shell craters. But then look at all of this behind them.
Right. There's so many of them.
Wow, there is something going on here.
These scars on the landscape are 6 miles beyond the Dragon's Teeth and 2.5 miles east of the concrete bunkers. Marty soon zeroes in on them.
Huh. The LiDAR has collected this fascinating range of imagery of this site. And what I want to have a look at is this big one here. Oh, look at this on the other side of this tree. That is a dug position. Oh yeah. That's a foxhole. There are just positions absolutely everywhere. That's one right here. Foxhole. Foxhole over there. Man, this is something else.
This is the evidence Pete and Marty have been searching for. Since their return to the forest, the 28th Division had advanced rapidly over the Siegfried Line. But right here, that stopped. The Americans dug foxholes when they couldn't advance. And Marty's found something even more significant.
This is special. Obviously, this is a troop shelter, not a shell crater. Dug by Americans during the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest 75 years ago. This shelter position would have had logs over the top of it. It provided some measure of shelter and comfort in a battle that was not known for providing many comforts. A position like this could have housed as many as 20 people. The size of it makes me think that it was probably associated with maybe a communications center, maybe a battalion headquarters, or maybe a medical aid station. And if it wasn't for the LiDAR, you'd never think for a second that anything was up here.
This was no temporary refuge. It was part of a complex of properly engineered dugouts. A whole battalion of 800 men hunkered down in this vicinity. The U.S. Army was getting bogged down in a static war of attrition. Even the trees seemed to be against them.
The forest is as much of a character in this drama as the two opposing sides that are confronting each other on the battlefield. And that's because the forest is a great equalizer. It creates circumstances where neither side can bring their most powerful weapons to bear. The American military by this point is making extensive use of armor support, tactical close air support, and artillery support, and yet the Hurtgen Forest strips those advantages away.
The Hurtgen Forest, planted a century earlier by the Prussians, was a stout defense. Standing 100 feet high and set just 8 feet apart, the trees were a massive obstacle.
And this is part of the reason why the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest descends into this stalemate where the Americans aren't able to make significant progress across the battlefield, because the battlefield is the forest, and you're fighting that as much as you're fighting the enemy that opposes you.
Aerial reconnaissance was also obscured by tree cover. The troops were advancing blind and without aerial support. After 3 weeks in the woods, they'd suffered 4,500 casualties. There are some trails through the forest. The U.S. Army used them to send tanks, trucks, and artillery to the front line, but hardly any arrived. Pete's come to the Call Trail to see if he can work out what happened.
We've heard stories that there's actually a tank track embedded in this trail, and sure enough, here it is. And I've got to scan this. We have to scan this. What an amazing artifact. Wow, look at that. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. That's got to be 20 feet, probably more.
Pete sets to work with his static scanner. He wants to build a 3D virtual model of the tank track. Maybe it'll explain why the world's best equipped army had to fight without its most powerful weapons. Back at HQ, Pete Kelsey's examining a 3D virtual model of the old tank track. There's something strange about it. It's a big piece of equipment to leave lying around.
Marty, have a look at this. I was doing some scanning up on the Call Trail, and look what is in the middle of the road.
Well, that appears to be a section of track from a Sherman tank. Okay. I'm not thinking that this is from a mine because the tracks don't appear to be damaged. And then also, they are belly up. So what we're seeing is actually the surface that will be in contact with the road.
If it's upside down, it hasn't just come adrift. So, it's a puzzle.
You said it was at a bend, didn't you?
That's right.
Yeah. Was it uphill, downhill?
It's on a very marked slope uphill.
Yeah. I bet you they put this here to provide traction for vehicles trying to climb the Call Trail.
Really? And that would explain why they are upside down in a perfectly straight line going up the grade.
That would explain it. So you have some spare parts laying around, you have a need, you make it happen.
Marty and Pete have proof that heavy equipment struggled on these narrow trails. When a tank got stuck, it became a 30-ton roadblock. Whole convoys would be vulnerable to enemy ambush. The U.S. Army was forced to improvise. The tank track was their ingenious solution. But even these difficulties can't account for the terrible death toll suffered in the battle for Hurtgen Forest. Marty suspects the most lethal enemy is all around them, hiding in plain sight. To test his theory, Marty is meeting with explosives expert Trevor Lawrence.
Okay, Marty, so there's your Second World War mortar bomb.
Nice, 3-inch.
It is.
Excellent. Inert, I hope.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Marty's theory is based on the difference between a conventional mortar and a super-quick fused mortar. The conventional mortar explodes on impact with the ground, and some of its force is absorbed by the earth. But a mortar with a super-quick fuse coming down in a forest is brutally different.
It all comes down to this very simple weapon system of mortar tube plus mortar bomb. As the mortar bomb descended down toward a target in a heavily forested area, branches of trees could come into contact with this simple point detonating fuse, and that would set the round off well above the ground.
To demonstrate what happens when a mortar explodes overhead, Trevor has prepared a powerful experiment.
Okay, so what we're going to do here is try and replicate what we saw in the forest in the Second World War. So we've built this scaffolding structure, and across here we've put these thick pine boards, which are similar in a way to the branches.
So you can simulate basically what this would have done on impact.
Absolutely, and what we're going to do is use one of these, which is, if you look, quite similar. So it's a very similar sort of metal, very brittle cast iron, and we're going to fill that with explosive exactly the same as would be inside here, and detonate it up in the canopy.
They'll use an ultra-high-speed camera to film what happens.
This is a camera capable of a high motion capture rate. And what that means is that when we record the explosion, we can slow it down to this very elegant slow motion.
All personnel withdraw to a bunker as Trevor prepares for detonation.
We ready out there?
We're all good to go. Confirm range clear.
Yeah, range clear.
Roger, range clear. Stand by. Firing in 3, 2, 1. Firing.
Whoa, I felt that in my chest.
The ultra-high-speed camera captures every detail as the mortar explodes. First, there's a blast wave. This alone can be lethal. Then the mortar shatters, and shards of hot shrapnel burst out. Finally, the tree branches shatter, creating a hail of deadly debris. An overhead blast is utterly devastating. GIs below had no real defense.
Oh my God, look at this. The aluminum sheets really took it on the nose. That sheet's even worse than this sheet. That's just plain vicious. Look at that.
Look here. We've gone right through
Oh
the
my
scaffolding.
God, yeah. Straight through it. Those fragments slice the steel pipe like that. They'd go right through the people beneath it. If you had a larger mortar concentration coming in on a platoon that was dug in, you could wipe out everybody.
Absolutely. And 30 men dug into a position, almost everybody would be either dead or injured. These airburst mortars, digging in, no protection from them.
This is what stopped the Americans in Hurtgen Forest. It's called a tree burst. Thousands of US soldiers die this way. It's crushing for morale. Soldiers know they face death at any moment. Foxholes offer no protection. And to make matters worse, it's November. A wet fall is becoming a bitter winter. "50 square miles of forest, the Hurtgen was treacherous territory. After 3 months of fierce fighting, the US Army was bogged down, stuck. And the winter of 1944 was exceptionally cold.
This is January. This gives at least a strong impression of the actual time period, the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest. And it gives you the visceral impression of what it's like to be here in wintertime. Yeah, because it's cold.
The US Army was reputedly the best equipped fighting force in the world. So, how would they fare in a German winter? To find out, Marty Morgan and Pete Kelsey are conducting some tests with local reenactor Michel Zymet.
The American soldiers that fight this battle, they bring uniforms, weapons, and equipment that we have available here because Michel's brought it. And not all of it was ideal for the type of environment that the Hurtgen Forest provided.
Trialing World War II standard issue kit may prove revealing.
Which jacket are you wearing, Michel?
I'm wearing the Mackinac jacket, which was some sort of coat. It's not very great for cold weather, but it's already something, I would say.
Many of the soldiers are still wearing the uniforms issued to them in the summer. They're forced to improvise.
Here's a look that you often see in the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest where they have put on the gas mask cape and then they throw the helmet on top of that. And so the gas mask cape is not intended as a piece of cold weather gear, and it's being adaptedly used as that. Well, now that we've got all the gear on, I'm thinking of an experiment that we could conduct. Pete, do you have that thermal imaging detector?
I do.
Pete applies the latest thermal imaging technology to see how these clothes perform in cold conditions.
Well, let's have a look. So, what you're looking at, what's bright, is where heat is being lost. The poor GI is suffering. Michel is cold. You don't even have to tell me you're cold. You're cold.
I would lie.
This bright image proves that after just minutes, an American GI would have been losing critical body heat in this uniform.
Whereas over to Marty, who's wearing 21st century synthetics and goose down, and you can see how his core is much darker, which means warmer, which means Marty is not losing heat.
And it's not just the body's core that suffers. If a soldier's feet get cold and wet, trench-foot becomes a deadly threat.
I'm going to take a wild guess that Michel's feet are probably pretty uncomfortable. Leather boots, which were probably perpetually wet.
But many soldiers didn't even have the basic equipment that Michel is wearing. Standard issue Meccano trench coats were in short supply. Many never got them.
Here's the real test. Let's see what it would look like if he was equipped like a lot of guys were, and that is without the Mackinac.
Sure.
Can you take it off?
So he's now losing heat really fast.
In so many of the period photos, this is what you see them wearing in the Hürtgen Forest. And that garment's just not up to the task. It's too lightweight.
And of course, if we were looking at a poor GI in a foxhole, he's going to be soaking wet.
Right.
So Michel's thermal signature would be dramatically different if he was wet.
Ill-equipped for freezing conditions, American troops paid a high price. It's estimated that 70,000 U.S. soldiers suffered injuries caused by that harsh winter in the Hürtgen Forest. Trenchfoot and hypothermia did more damage than the Dragon's Teeth or the bunkers. And all the while, the German army fought ferociously in defense of the fatherland. December of 1944 in the Hürtgen Forest. The freezing conditions and the tree-burst mortar fire are taking a terrible toll on the American forces. But where are the German mortar rounds coming from? Have the German infantry built further defenses beyond the Siegfried Line? The LiDAR looks blank, except for some faint, twisting lines. They seem to stretch for miles, and they're pockmarked with shell craters. They're less than 5 miles ahead of the U.S. foxholes. Marty and Christoph go to investigate.
What do you think? We're about 50 meters from it?
Yeah. If we draw a line from the wood, we should see it.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Oh, God, look at that. It's clearly visible. I expected it to be overgrown, but it's not.
No, see.
Oh, my,
Comes
yeah,
here.
look at it right here. Oh, wow, this is incredible.
Yeah. And we could now basically follow it for 10 kilometers.
Is it that long?
Yes.
Uninterrupted,
Yes.
really?
Yeah.
My gosh.
The Dragon's Teeth, the bunkers, now this third line of defense. The German strategy was defense in depth. Instead of relying on a single line of defense, they were prepared to retreat from one line, only to create another line a few miles behind.
When they built this trench, the west wall has already been breached. So they lost what
that
they think of
advantage.
as their most powerful
Right.
line of defense.
And it falls to this.
And then it falls to this.
Dug trenches in the woods.
The Americans have to fight for every inch of the way.
This defense in depth enabled the Germans to counter every American advance. U.S. forces still haven't achieved the decisive breakthrough they'd hoped for. But by mid-December 1944, the tide is turning.
This trench line really is a metaphor about the different situations that the Germans and the Americans were in.
These German positions are little more than hastily dug scrapings. No concrete defenses here. After many months of guerrilla warfare, they are desperate. Was this the site of fierce fighting? 21st century tech may have an answer.
We're hoping that the answer lies with our friend Andreas here, who happens to have the ideal piece of kit for this, which is a magnetometer. And between the two sensors, it can pick up variations in the Earth's magnetic field.
Andreas scans the ground. The magnetometer can detect disturbances caused by intense heat.
Oh, look at that. And those jump right out at you.
These are two really, really big ones here.
These are not caused by agriculture.
Right.
That means we had a chemical fire there of 1,000 degrees
A very,
plus.
very strong fire.
So probably ammunition burning now.
Yeah.
Well, we don't really see a trench, not a structure, not a linear structure.
If you look at these anomalies, the black ones without the white rim, these are usually man-made holes. So the earth has been shifted. So somebody dug a hole there.
And there's so many of them.
Yes, we're standing on a green pasture. Underneath, you have the war still present.
It's amazing.
And there's more. Lucas has been over the area with a metal detector.
We found a container for a German gas mask.
The gas mask is evidence of battle. And it holds a grisly secret.
It's a very nice find. It's a canteen bottle, maybe from a German soldier. And we see here bullet, and here's going inside and that's going outside.
This battlefield of shallow scrapes and relics is evidence of German desperation and a last-ditch mentality. And wave after wave of American infantry keep coming.
We keep pouring humanity into that battle. We keep pouring divisions that get so hopelessly banged up that they have to go somewhere to repair themselves after the Hurtgen. That was the cost of the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest. It took in humanity and it spit out what was left. This was one of the toughest battles the American military fights in the Second World War.
Small wonder that many didn't make it out alive. In a sense, the whole of the Battle of Hurtgen Forest was part of defense in depth. Because behind German lines, Hitler was amassing a huge force of troops and tanks for a massive surprise attack. On December 16th, they would crash through the American line to start a new fight. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last desperate bid to defend the fatherland. But the German army was overstretched and the offensive failed. By February 1945, the Americans were out of the woods and across the Ruhr River, heading for Berlin. The Battle of Hurtgen Forest cost almost 30,000 American lives, but critically weakened the German army. It played a vital part in the eventual defeat of Hitler in May 1945. Sadly, even after the war, the forest went on killing.
There's an extra level of sadness to this cemetery because here you have buried 3,001 victims of the Hurtgen Forest, mostly German combatants, but also 35 German civilians, Russians, Belgians, and even 100 men who lost their lives here after the war ended, attempting to clear all of the unexploded ordnance that was left behind. So the Hurtgen Forest was even claiming lives after the end of World War II, and that somehow makes this place seem all the more tragic.